Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our channel. Tonight we journey deep into one of the most chilling and enigmatic crime stories in American history. A story that begins in the late 1960s, a time when the cultural landscape of the United States was shifting dramatically. People were captivated by music festivals, civil rights movements, and a rapidly changing society. But beneath this wave of transformation, darkness lurked, an unseen predator who would forever etch his name into the annals of criminal history. He called himself the Zodiac. It all started with a series of murders in Northern California that seemed, at first glance, like random acts of violence. Young couples targeted while sitting in parked cars. A taxi driver brutally attacked in San Francisco. Isolated crime scenes, separated by distance and circumstance, yet all connected by a single thread. The mocking letters and cryptic messages sent by a killer who thrived on fear. This was not a criminal who wished to remain in the shadows. No. The Zodiac craved attention. He inserted himself into the narrative. Feeding off the panic he created, he contacted newspapers, demanding front-page publication of his ciphers, threatening more violence if his wishes were not met. It was a bold, theatrical move that ensured his crimes would dominate headlines and stir terror in the hearts of Californians. The late 1960s was an era when serial killers had not yet become a household term. Communities still held on to the belief that such horrors were rare, isolated and far from their everyday lives. But the Zodiac shattered this sense of safety. His crimes were not just about taking lives. They were about psychological warfare. Every letter he wrote was laced with arrogance, as though he were toying with both the public and the authorities, daring them to stop him. Imagine the atmosphere. Fear creeping into suburban neighborhoods, parents warning their children not to wander too far, couples hesitant to spend time alone in secluded places. The Zodiac's reach extended beyond his victims. His influence infected the very psyche of society. The first confirmed attack attributed to the Zodiac occurred in 1968, when two teenagers were shot in their car on Lake Herman Road. The brutality was shocking, but at that point, no one realized it was the beginning of something much larger. Months later, another young couple was attacked at Blue Rock Springs Park. This time, one victim survived, and described the assailant, a man with a flashlight taped to his gun, methodically carrying out the attack. And then, the phone rang. The killer himself had called the police to claim responsibility. By then it became chillingly clear, this was no ordinary murderer. He was not hiding. He was boasting. He was taunting. He wanted recognition. And soon after, the letters began. Written in a cold, matter-of-fact style, the messages contained gruesome details only the killer would know. He signed them with a unique crosshair-like symbol, an image that quickly became synonymous with fear. The Zodiac reveled in the chaos he created. By sending encrypted codes, complex puzzles filled with strange symbols, he turned his crimes into a deadly game. And the terrifying part, he promised that within these codes lay his identity. Yet, even after decades of analysis, some of these ciphers remain unsolved to this very day. The authorities scrambled. Local police departments coordinated with the FBI, forensic experts, and cryptographers. Newspapers published the letters, and amateur sleuths across the country tried their hand at cracking the codes. Some were solved, revealing disturbing messages about his motives and twisted view of life, but none unmasked who he truly was. The Zodiac remained a phantom. As the case grew, so did the legend. Every new attack, every new letter, deepened the mystery. The killer became more than just a man. He became a symbol of fear, a reminder that even in the golden age of optimism and cultural revolution, evil could still walk among us. The story of the Zodiac Killer took a darker and more disturbing turn when he chose to define himself not by his crimes alone, but by the identity he created. Unlike most killers who hid in silence, he crafted a persona, one that would live far beyond his attacks. He called himself the Zodiac. This name first appeared in the summer of 1969, when newspapers in California began receiving letters. These were not the ramblings of an anonymous tipster. They were deliberate, calculated, and chillingly confident. Each letter began with a salutation. Unlike any the police had ever seen, "This is the Zodiac speaking." With those words, he transformed himself into something more than a man. He became a myth, an enigma, and an ever-present spectre haunting the collective imagination of the public. The choice of the name Zodiac was no accident. It carried connotations of astrology, fate, and the cycles of time. It suggested something eternal, untouchable, beyond the ordinary realm of human behavior. By attaching himself to this symbol, the killer framed himself as an unstoppable force destined, perhaps even ordained, to leave his mark on history. He wanted to be remembered not merely as a criminal, but as a legend. To reinforce his new identity, he introduced a personal logo. Each letter was signed with a crosshair-like symbol, a circle with a cross running through it. Simple, yet unforgettable. It was part signature, part brand, part weapon of fear. When Californians saw that symbol on the front page of their morning paper, they knew another message had come. Another challenge, another reminder that he was still out there. These letters were not merely admissions of guilt, they were performances. The Zodiac used them to toy with investigators, to correct media reports, and to claim responsibility for crimes. He demanded attention and ensured he got it by threatening further violence if his words were not published. Newspapers faced an impossible decision: deny him the spotlight and risk more bloodshed, or comply and give him the notoriety he craved. Most of the time, they chose the latter. It is important to understand the psychological power of this strategy. By naming himself, by inventing this identity, the Zodiac took control of the narrative. He was no longer a faceless suspect hunted by the police. He was a character of his own making, one that commanded headlines, inspired fear, and left the public anxiously awaiting his next move. His name became inseparable from his crimes, ensuring his place in history, and he did not stop at mere words. The Zodiac delighted in sending cryptic puzzles with his correspondence. Encrypted with strange symbols and seemingly nonsensical characters, these ciphers came with a promise that solving them would reveal his true identity. It was a cruel game. While families of victims grieved, while communities locked their doors at night, while detectives struggled to follow the trail, he sat somewhere in the shadows, amused by the chaos he unleashed. When the first cipher was cracked by a schoolteacher and his wife, the solution was horrifying, not because it revealed who he was, but because it revealed what he thought. "I like killing people because it is so much fun," the decoded message read. It was not a name, not a confession, but a declaration of twisted pleasure. And so, the riddle deepened. The killer had promised his identity within the code, but once again, he had deceived the world. By that point, the name Zodiac had become more than a title. It was a brand of terror. Communities whispered it with dread. Police officers spoke it with frustration. Journalists printed it with urgency. He had carved his identity into the psyche of America, and every time he introduced himself, "This is the Zodiac speaking," it was a reminder that he was in control. The solution of that first cipher, while terrifying, only deepened the mystery. The Zodiac had promised his name, his identity within the code. Instead, all it gave the world was a window into his twisted mind. He was not hiding who he was as a person, he was showcasing who he was as a monster. For him, the act of killing was a game, a thrill. The cipher had been cracked, yet the killer's true identity remained buried. And this was only the beginning. More letters followed, each filled with arrogance and cruelty. In some, the Zodiac included details of crimes that only the killer could know, proving his authenticity. In others, he sketched diagrams of bomb designs, claimed he was watching schoolchildren, and promised bloodshed if his demands were not met. His words created widespread panic, forcing authorities to treat every message as a serious threat. One letter, sent in 1969, included a piece of a victim's bloody shirt, horrifying proof that the writer was indeed the killer. This gruesome signature silenced any doubt that the letters might be the work of a hoaxer. The Zodiac's communications were real, and they gave him the power to terrify an entire region without even leaving his house. As the letters piled up, so did the ciphers. Some were short and seemingly unsolvable, while others were sprawling codes filled with strange characters. A few have been cracked, but many remain undeciphered to this day. One of the most famous, known as the 340 cipher, resisted solution for more than 50 years until it was finally decoded in 2020 by an international team of codebreakers. Yet even then, the solution revealed no name, no identity, just more rambling words about enjoying murder and mocking authorities. This was the essence of the Zodiac strategy. He dangled the promise of answers, but always withheld the truth. He claimed that within his ciphers lay his identity. But every solution led only to more questions. He played with investigators like a cat, toying with its prey, watching as police, cryptographers, and ordinary citizens grew increasingly frustrated. The media frenzy surrounding the letters only amplified his reach. Every new message was front-page news. Every code became a challenge, a riddle for the world to solve. And through it all, the Zodiac remained an unseen puppeteer, pulling the strings of fear and fascination. The letters also revealed something else, his obsession with recognition. Unlike many killers who acted in silence, the Zodiac desperately wanted to be heard, to be acknowledged, to be feared. His words were as deadly as his bullets. In fact, for many Californians, the letters were more terrifying than the crimes themselves, because they made it clear that the Zodiac could strike anywhere, at any time, and that he delighted in the suffering he caused. Decades later, these letters and ciphers remain among the most infamous documents in the history of crime. They are studied not only for their content, but for their impact. They changed how law enforcement dealt with criminals who sought media attention. They demonstrated how one man, armed not just with weapons but with words, could hold an entire region hostage to fear. And even now, with modern technology, with DNA testing, and with endless theories circulating, the mystery endures. Who was the Zodiac? What compelled him to create such elaborate puzzles? And why, after all these years, do his words still send shivers down the spine of anyone who reads them? The letters and ciphers were his masterpiece, his way of etching himself into history. They ensured that even if his true name is never discovered, the name Zodiac will never be forgotten. But beyond the ciphers and puzzles lay the real tragedies, the victims. Behind every cryptic message, there were shattered families, stolen futures, and human lives cut short. Officially, the Zodiac is linked to 5 confirmed murders, though he himself claimed many more. These 5 names are the anchors of the case, the evidence that ties his legend to reality. The first recognized attack occurred on December 20, 1968, along a quiet stretch of Lake Herman Road, just outside the small town of Benicia, California. On that cold winter night, teenagers Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday parked their car for what was supposed to be a simple evening together. Instead, they were ambushed. Shots rang out in the darkness. David was shot at close range, and Betty Lou attempted to flee, only to be gunned down as she ran. Investigators later described the scene as execution style. The brutality shocked the small community, but at the time, no one realized it was just the beginning of a horrifying pattern. The next attack came just 6 months later, on July 4, 1969, a day meant for celebration across America, but one that would turn into tragedy in Vallejo, California. Darlene Ferrin, a young waitress, and Michael Magot, a friend, sat in a parked car at Blue Rock Springs Park. Without warning, a vehicle pulled up beside them. The driver stepped out, approached with a flashlight taped to his gun, and unleashed a barrage of gunfire. Darlene was killed instantly, while Michael, though critically wounded, survived. It was Michael's testimony that gave police their first living description of the Zodiac, a heavy-set man, possibly in his late 20s to early 30s, with short hair and glasses. Hours later, the police received a chilling phone call. The caller calmly confessed to the attack, and even claimed responsibility for the previous murders at Lake Herman Road. The voice on the line was cold, emotionless, and unforgettable. Then, On September 27, 1969, the Zodiac struck again, this time with a chilling twist. At Lake Berryessa, college students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were enjoying a relaxing afternoon by the water. Suddenly, a man appeared wearing a bizarre costume, a black hood with cut-out eye holes, a bib-like chestpiece adorned with his infamous crosshair symbol. Armed with a gun and a knife, he tied the couple before brutally stabbing them multiple times. Cecilia succumbed to her wounds 2 days later, while Brian miraculously survived. What made this attack even more disturbing was the killer's theatrics. He left a handwritten message on Brian's car door, listing the dates of his previous murders, as though signing his work like an artist. The final confirmed murder came just 2 weeks later, on October 11, 1969, in San Francisco. Taxi driver Paul Stine picked up a fare in the evening hours. His passenger directed him to a quiet neighborhood in Presidio Heights. Once the cab stopped, the killer pulled out a gun and shot Steen in the head at point-blank range. He then calmly wiped down the vehicle, tore off a piece of the driver's bloody shirt, and disappeared into the night. This brazen attack was different. It happened in a city neighborhood, not in a secluded lover's lane, and this time there were eyewitnesses. Several teenagers watching from a window described a man in his late 30s, stocky build, with glasses. Despite this, the killer managed to vanish before police could catch him. Days later, newspapers received another letter, this one including the piece of Paul Stine's shirt, as proof of authenticity. These 5 murders are the only ones investigators can definitively link to the Zodiac Killer, but he himself claimed many more. In his letters, he boasted of killing dozens, sometimes writing numbers like 37 or 51, to taunt the police with his supposed body count. Yet beyond the confirmed 5, concrete evidence tying him to other murders remains elusive. What makes these cases particularly haunting is the randomness of the victims. Unlike many killers who target a specific type, whether by age, gender, or lifestyle, the Zodiac's victims varied. Teenagers on a date, a young mother, a college couple, a taxi driver. His unpredictability heightened the terror, because anyone could be next. The survivors' testimonies also painted an unnerving picture. Michael Mageau remembered his attacker's calm, methodical approach. Brian Hartnell recalled the killer's deliberate speech, as if rehearsed, and his eerie costume that transformed him into a figure of nightmare. These glimpses into the Zodiac's behavior suggested someone who enjoyed theatrics as much as violence. Someone who saw murder not only as killing but as performance. Decades later, the names of Betty Lou, David, Darlene, Cecilia, and Paul remain at the heart of this mystery. They are not just footnotes in the story of the Zodiac. They are the reason the case matters. Behind every cipher, every letter, every headline, there were families shattered and futures stolen. When discussing the Zodiac Killer, each confirmed attack carries its own terrifying story. Yet some stand out not only for their brutality, but also for the way they revealed the killer's twisted methods and theatrical style. These notable attacks are crucial because they show us how the Zodiac carefully crafted his reign of terror, each incident a performance designed to shock, confuse, and haunt. Let us return to the Blue Rock Springs attack, on July 4, 1969. This event was pivotal, not only because it resulted in another death, but because it marked the Zodiac's transition from a hidden predator to a bold criminal who directly communicated with authorities. After ambushing Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau, the killer did something chilling. He picked up a payphone, just blocks from the Vallejo Police Department, and calmly confessed to the crime. "I also killed those kids last year," he added, linking himself to the earlier Lake Herman Road murders. It was not just violence. It was a declaration of power. He wanted investigators to know that he was in control, that he could strike and vanish at will. Then came Lake Berryessa, September 27, 1969. This attack is perhaps the most bizarre and disturbing of all. Imagine it. A warm afternoon, a quiet lakeside, 2 young college students, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, enjoying their day. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the trees. But this was no ordinary assailant. The man wore a black hood with cut-out eyeholes, and a bib on his chest marked with the crosshair symbol. He carried a gun. But it was not the weapon that shocked them, it was the theatrics. The Zodiac bound them with rope, methodically, almost ritualistically. Then, he pulled out a knife and stabbed them repeatedly. Before leaving, he approached Brian's car and scrawled a message on the door, the dates of his previous murders, along with the same crosshair symbol. It was as if he was signing a piece of art, branding his work for the world to see. Celia would later die from her injuries, but Brian survived his testimony, providing one of the most vivid insights into the killer's chilling presence. The most brazen attack, however, unfolded just weeks later, on October 11, 1969, in San Francisco's Presidio Heights neighborhood. Taxi driver Paul Steen picked up a passenger who directed him to Washington and Cherry Streets. Once the cab stopped, the passenger pulled out a handgun and executed Steen with a single shot to the head. This was unlike the Zodiac's previous attacks. No secluded lovers' lane, no isolated countryside. This was the heart of the city, a bold murder committed in a residential neighborhood. Even more shocking, the killer lingered. He wiped down the cab, tore off a piece of Steen's bloody shirt, and walked away casually, almost fearlessly. Several teenage witnesses watched from a nearby window, and later gave descriptions of a man in his 30s to 40s, stocky build, glasses. Police officers even encountered a man matching this description near the crime scene, but due to a tragic miscommunication, they let him go. Later, when a letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle containing a piece of Steen's shirt, the city was plunged into terror. The Zodiac had struck in plain sight, and he had escaped without a trace. These attacks highlighted the killer's evolution. He was not static. He changed methods, settings, and weapons. From shootings to stabbings, from rural areas to urban streets, each crime felt like a new act in a twisted play. This unpredictability made him nearly impossible to profile. Was he calculating or impulsive, organized or chaotic? The truth seemed to be a disturbing blend of both. One detail that made these attacks especially frightening was the way the Zodiac seemed to thrive on taunting police afterward. After Blue Rock Springs, he used that phone call to prove his involvement. After Lake Berryessa, he left the chilling inscription on the car door. After Paul Stein's murder, he mailed the bloody shirt piece as undeniable evidence. Each time he transformed a horrific act into a statement. Each time he reinforced his identity as the Zodiac. And for the public, these attacks created a paralyzing fear. Couples avoided secluded areas. Taxi drivers looked nervously at their passengers. Parents warned their children not to linger outdoors. The Zodiac's crimes were not just murders. They were disruptions to the fabric of everyday life. He forced people to change how they lived, simply by existing. What makes these notable attacks unforgettable is how they showcased both the brutality of the Zodiac and the dark brilliance of his theatrics. He was a killer, but also a manipulator of fear. He left survivors alive to tell the tale. He left evidence behind, not carelessly, but deliberately, to make sure his story reached the front page. And through it all, he maintained the chilling calm of someone who knew he was untouchable. Looking back, investigators agree that these attacks were the backbone of the Zodiac's reign. They were not only crimes but performances, each carefully staged to ensure maximum impact. And though decades have passed, their details remain etched into history, studied endlessly by detectives, historians, and true crime enthusiasts alike. California would never be the same after those nights. The Zodiac had proven that he could strike anywhere, at any time, and leave the entire state trembling in his shadow. And with each crime, his legend grew stronger. He was not just killing people, he was building an identity, one murder and one letter at a time. In the dark and terrifying saga of the Zodiac Killer, only a few voices emerged from the shadows to tell what it was like to face him directly. These were the survivors. The rare individuals who encountered the Zodiac, endured his violence, and somehow lived to tell the tale. Their testimonies remain among the most important pieces of evidence in this unsolved mystery. and they provide chilling glimpses into the mind and methods of one of history's most infamous killers. The first survivor we know of was Michael Mageau, attacked on the night of July 4, 1969, at Blue Rock Springs Park. He and his friend Darlene Ferrin were sitting in a parked car when another vehicle approached. At first, Michael thought it was someone they knew, but the driver suddenly pulled out a flashlight and gun, firing shot after shot into the car. Michael was critically injured, but he survived. When police arrived, he described the attacker as a stocky white male, possibly in his late 20s to early 30s, with short brown hair and glasses. Though the details were vague, this was one of the first physical descriptions of the Zodiac. What made Michael's testimony unforgettable was not just his description, but the way the Zodiac followed up. Hours after the attack, a man called the police to confess. Speaking in a calm, emotionless voice, he claimed responsibility for both the Blue Rock Springs shooting and the earlier murders at Lake Herman Road. For investigators, the phone call confirmed the link, but Michael's first-hand account gave the Zodiac a face, even if only a blurred one. Then came Brian Hartnell, the survivor of the horrifying Lake Berryessa attack on September 27, 1969. Brian and his friend Cecilia Shepard were enjoying a peaceful afternoon by the lake when a figure emerged from the trees. This man wore a bizarre costume, a dark hood with eye holes and a chest piece marked with the Zodiac symbol. He carried a gun, but instead of immediately shooting, he spoke. Brian later recalled the killer's voice measured, deliberate, almost rehearsed. The Zodiac told them he was an escaped convict, that he needed their car and money. He tied their hands with pre-cut lengths of rope, moving with disturbing precision. Then, without warning, he pulled out a knife and stabbed them repeatedly. Brian later described how the Zodiac seemed methodical, as if following a script. After the attack, the killer calmly walked to Brian's car and wrote a message on the door, listing his previous murders. Cecilia tragically died 2 days later, but Brian survived and recounted every horrifying detail. His description of the Zodiac's costume and behavior remains one of the most vivid accounts we have of the killer in action. What makes Brian's testimony so haunting is the theatrical nature of the attack. Unlike the sudden gunfire of Blue Rock Springs, Lake Berryessa was staged like a performance. The hood, the symbol, the calm voice, it was as if the Zodiac wanted to create an unforgettable image. And thanks to Brian, that image has endured for decades. There was another survivor, though less often discussed, in the earlier Lake Herman Road case. Some investigators believe that David Faraday may have survived long enough after being shot to provide limited information before passing away, but this remains debated. What is certain is that Michael Mageau and Brian Hartnell stand as the two voices who looked into the face of the Zodiac's terror and lived to share their stories. Their testimonies carried weight beyond personal survival. They gave investigators something tangible: descriptions of the Zodiac's appearance, his mannerisms, his voice, his methods. Michael's account suggested a man who attacked swiftly and coldly. Brian's account painted a picture of someone theatrical, ritualistic, and manipulative. Together, they revealed a killer who was both impulsive and calculating, brutal and yet disturbingly composed. But these survivors also carried invisible scars. Michael lived with the trauma of watching Darlene die beside him. Brian endured not only physical wounds, but also the unbearable loss of Cecilia, who did not survive the ordeal. Their stories remind us that behind the headlines and mysteries, real people suffered, and the Zodiac's cruelty left scars that could never fully heal. For investigators, the survivors' words became the foundation of the Zodiac's profile. Yet even with eyewitnesses, sketches, and detailed accounts, the killer remained elusive. He seemed to shift appearances, blending into the background of everyday life. Was he a neighbor, a county worker, a man sitting unnoticed in a cafe? The survivors had seen him, but the world still did not know who he really was. Decades later, their testimonies continue to hold immense value. They are not just relics of the past, but living evidence, preserved in case files, documentaries, and interviews. They serve as haunting reminders that the Zodiac was real, not just a cipher, not just a letter, not just a symbol. He was a man of flesh and blood, capable of standing just a few feet away, speaking in a calm voice, while plotting unspeakable violence. And so, while the Zodiac sought to create fear through mystery, the survivors gave us truth through memory. Their words, though painful, cut through the myth and reveal the human horror beneath. When we think of the Zodiac Killer, one image immediately comes to mind: a simple circle with a cross running through it. This symbol, so plain at first glance, became one of the most chilling emblems in American criminal history. The Zodiac symbol was more than just a signature. It was his brand, his calling card, and a psychological weapon that magnified his legend. The symbol first appeared in the letters he mailed to newspapers in 1969. Each time, after bragging about his crimes or mocking the police, he signed his words with the same strange figure circled, plus a circle divided by a cross. It looked like the crosshairs of a rifle scope, an unsettling suggestion that the killer viewed people as targets. This was no coincidence. By attaching this emblem to his crimes, the Zodiac elevated himself from a faceless murderer to a recognizable persona, something that could be instantly identified and feared. Imagine being a journalist at the San Francisco Chronicle in those days. You open an envelope and see handwriting filled with threats, and at the bottom, that eerie symbol staring back at you. It was not just a signature, it was a brand of terror, one that signaled the letter was authentic. Police knew it too. Whenever the crosshair symbol appeared, there was no doubt. This was the Zodiac speaking. The use of a symbol was brilliant in its dark simplicity. Unlike a name, which could be forgotten, or a face, which could fade from memory, a symbol has permanence. It can be reproduced endlessly. Anyone could draw it, anyone could recognize it. The Zodiac did not just give himself a name, he gave himself a logo. In doing so, he blurred the line between reality and myth. He was not just a criminal anymore. He was an icon of fear. And it did not stop with letters. The symbol appeared at crime scenes too. At Lake Berryessa, after stabbing Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, the Zodiac scrawled his symbol on Brian's car door, alongside the dates of his previous attacks. It was a chilling declaration: I was here. This was my work. No other serial killer of that era marked his crimes with such a distinct, recognizable brand. But what did the symbol really mean? Theories abound. Some believe it represented crosshairs, emphasizing the Zodiac's fascination with hunting people like prey. Others point out that it resembled ancient astrological or alchemical symbols, tying it back to his chosen name, Zodiac. Could it have been inspired by astrology, fate, or cycles of time? Or was it simply chosen for its simplicity and psychological impact? To this day, no one knows for sure. What we do know is that the symbol gave the Zodiac an aura of mystery that extended far beyond his crimes. It turned him into something larger than life, a figure that loomed in the public imagination. People feared not just the man, but the emblem itself. Seeing it on paper, in the news, or at a crime scene was enough to send chills down spines. It also complicated the investigation. Because the symbol was so easy to copy, hoax letters began to circulate. Some were genuine, others were fakes, and police had to determine which was which. Still, the original presence of the crosshair symbol became the ultimate proof of authenticity, a sign that the real Zodiac was behind the words. The brilliance of this psychological tactic cannot be overstated. By creating and consistently using his own symbol, the Zodiac ensured that even if his real identity was never known, the world would never forget him. He turned his crimes into a story, and his story into a legend, one symbol at a time. Decades later, the symbol still carries power. It appears in documentaries, books, and films. It has become shorthand for mystery and menace. When people see the crosshair circle today, they immediately think of the Zodiac Killer, even if they know little else about the case. That is the enduring strength of his chosen emblem. It outlived the man himself, embedding him forever in American culture. The Zodiac symbol stands as a reminder that fear can be manufactured as much through ideas as through actions. A single drawing, repeated again and again, became as terrifying as the crimes it represented. It gave the killer immortality in the darkest possible sense. One of the most enduring legacies of the Zodiac Killer is not only the violence he inflicted, but the puzzles he left behind. While most serial killers sought to erase evidence of their crimes, the Zodiac did the opposite. He left behind ciphers, complex codes made up of symbols and strange characters, daring the world to solve them. Some were cracked, others remain unsolved to this very day, and with them, the mystery of his identity continues to haunt us. The first cipher, known as the Zodiac 408, arrived in July 1969. It was split into 3 parts, each sent to a different Bay Area newspaper, accompanied by letters demanding they publish his work on the front page. If they refused, he threatened to unleash more violence. The newspapers complied, and soon the public was staring at a grid of symbols, triangles, circles, backward letters, strange shapes, 408 characters in total. For days, professional cryptographers struggled. And then, in a surprising twist, it was solved not by experts, but by a schoolteacher, Donald Hardin, and his wife Betty. The message, however, was not what the world expected. It did not contain his real name or any straightforward confession. Instead, it was a disturbing manifesto. "I like killing people because it is so much fun." The rest rambled on about murder as a game, with humans as the ultimate prey. It was chilling, yes, but it revealed nothing about who he really was. The cipher had delivered terror, but not truth. And then came the Zodiac 340, perhaps the most infamous cipher of all. Sent in November 1969, it consisted of 340 symbols arranged in 20 lines. For decades it resisted every attempt at decryption. Cryptographers, the FBI, even amateur codebreakers across the globe, tried and failed. The cipher became a legend in its own right, a puzzle taunting humanity, as much as the killer once taunted California. It was not until 2020, over 50 years later, that a team of international codebreakers finally cracked it. But once again the solution disappointed those who hoped for a revelation. The Zodiac's words were cruel and mocking. "I hope you are having lots of fun trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber, because it will send me to paradise all the sooner." Just like the first cipher, it revealed no identity, no name. It was a game, nothing more. A game designed to waste time, create headlines, and keep him in control of the narrative. Other ciphers remain unsolved. The Z13, only 13 characters long, seemed to hint at containing his name. "My name as it began," followed by the cryptic code. Yet experts could not decipher it. Many believe it may have been unsolvable from the start, a cruel trick to frustrate investigators. Then there is the Z32 cipher, supposedly tied to a bomb threat against a school bus. To this day it has not been cracked. Was it genuine, or another manipulation meant to spread fear? The uncertainty is part of the Zodiac's enduring power. What makes these ciphers so haunting is not just the possibility that they might contain the killer's identity, but the way they reveal his obsession with control and performance. He was not just killing, he was staging a psychological war. Each cipher was a riddle, a challenge, a way to prove that he was smarter than the police, the press, and the public. He controlled the conversation. He dictated the headlines. He turned his crimes into puzzles for the world to obsess over. Experts have debated whether the Zodiac truly intended for his ciphers to be solvable. Some argue that he carefully designed them, knowing they would eventually be cracked, but only after years of frustration. Others believe many were nothing but gibberish, designed to waste resources and heighten his legend. Either way, the result was the same. His identity remained hidden, and his story grew. These unsolved ciphers have outlived the man himself. They continue to fascinate cryptographers, armchair detectives, and true crime enthusiasts alike. Every few years, someone claims to have found the key, but so far, none have succeeded beyond the ciphers already verified. The Zodiac's puzzles remain open wounds in the case, reminders that he still holds power over the narrative, even decades after his last known crime. Think about it. More than half a century later, people are still trying to solve his games. That is the depth of his psychological reach. He did not just commit crimes, he engineered a mystery that continues to pull people in, keeping his legend alive long after most cases would have faded into history. The unsolved ciphers are not just puzzles. They are symbols of the Zodiac's manipulation. They remind us that his greatest weapon was not just his gun or his knife, but his ability to command attention, to force people to think about him, to wonder who he was. Every unsolved line of code is another echo of his mocking voice. You will never catch me. By the late 1960s, the Zodiac Killer was no longer just a criminal, haunting the streets of Northern California. He had become a national obsession. His letters, his ciphers, and his symbol dominated front pages and nightly newscasts. More than just committing crimes, the Zodiac had mastered the art of manipulating the media, turning newspapers and television into his personal stage. The frenzy that followed gave him exactly what he wanted: fear, attention, and immortality. The turning point came in July 1969, when the Zodiac sent 3 nearly identical letters to the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. Each one contained a portion of his now infamous 408-character cipher, along with chilling demands. He insisted the newspapers publish his puzzles on the front page, threatening further violence if they refused. It was a bold move, forcing the media into his twisted game. After consulting with police, the papers complied. The ciphers went public, and with them, the Zodiac's name entered the spotlight. From that moment, every letter he sent became an event. Journalists rushed to cover his taunts, his threats, and his puzzles. Television anchors debated his motives. Radio hosts speculated on his identity. The Zodiac understood something very few criminals of his time realized: that fear spreads faster when amplified by the media. Every word he wrote echoed across California, turning local tragedies into a nationwide sensation. But the coverage also came at a cost. By printing his letters, the media gave the Zodiac exactly what he craved: recognition. He was not just another nameless suspect in police files. He was a celebrity of terror, and he knew it. In his letters, he mocked both the press and the police, bragging about his ability to control the headlines. One infamous message even included the chilling phrase, "This is the Zodiac speaking." With those 5 words, he did not just write a letter, he made an entrance. The frenzy also fueled panic. Parents in the Bay Area warned their children to stay close to home. Couples avoided remote areas. Taxi drivers in San Francisco feared late-night fares, remembering what had happened to Paul Steen. Rumors spread like wildfire, with people claiming to spot the Zodiac everywhere, from crowded shopping centers to quiet suburban streets. The more the media covered him, the bigger his shadow grew. In some ways, the Zodiac exploited a new era of journalism. The late 1960s was a time of fierce competition among newspapers and television stations. Each outlet wanted the biggest scoop, the latest update, the boldest headline. The Zodiac fed this hunger, drip-feeding the press with just enough new material to stay in the spotlight. He played reporters and editors like pawns, knowing they could not resist the drama of his story. This relationship between Killer and media created an unprecedented spectacle. Newspapers debated whether they were serving the public or playing into his hands. Law enforcement worried that giving him a platform only emboldened him, yet denying him coverage risked provoking further violence. It was a deadly catch-22, and the Zodiac exploited it masterfully. The media frenzy also inspired a wave of public involvement. Amateur detectives, cryptographers, and curious citizens poured over the ciphers, hoping to be the one to crack the code. Letters to the editor poured in with theories, sketches, and tips. Some even falsely confessed to being the Zodiac, adding confusion to the chaos. The case became not just a police investigation, but a cultural phenomenon, one that ordinary people felt personally invested in. The sheer amount of coverage also distorted reality. The Zodiac officially killed 5 people, but his presence in headlines made him seem almost larger than life, as if he was striking everywhere, at all times. Other crimes in California were sometimes wrongly attributed to him, deepening the sense of paranoia. In this way, the media did not just report on the Zodiac, they magnified him, helping create the enduring myth that still persists today. And perhaps that was the Zodiac's ultimate goal. By manipulating newspapers and broadcasting his threats, he ensured his name would never be forgotten. Long after his crimes faded from memory, the stories written about him would keep the mystery alive. He understood the power of media better than anyone, and he used it to transform himself from a criminal into a legend. It is chilling to consider. Without the media frenzy, would the Zodiac Killer still be remembered today, or would he have been just another unsolved case in the dusty files of California police? Instead, he remains one of the most famous unidentified killers in the world, his legacy cemented not only by his crimes, but by the words printed in black and white for millions to see. As the Zodiac's letters spread fear across California, police departments scramble to keep up. And this brings us to the next stage of the story, the suspects and investigations. From the very beginning, investigators knew they were dealing with a criminal unlike any other. The Zodiac was unpredictable, intelligent, and cruelly theatrical. He left behind evidence letters, phone calls, ciphers, even a piece of Paul Stein's shirt, yet nothing ever led to a solid arrest. Every clue seemed to dissolve into shadows. Perhaps the most famous suspect was Arthur Lee Allen, a man who matched many elements of the Zodiac profile. Allen was a former schoolteacher with a troubled past, a fascination with ciphers, and a disturbing record of inappropriate behavior. He was even reported to have told friends that he wanted to call himself Zodiac. In 1972, police searched his home and found weapons, tapes, and cryptic writings. Later, in the 1990s, DNA testing was conducted on evidence from the Zodiac letters, but Allen's DNA did not match. Despite years of suspicion, no concrete proof ever tied him to the crimes. For some, he remains the strongest candidate, but for others, just another dead end. Another notable suspect was Richard Gaikowski, a journalist for an underground newspaper in San Francisco. His physical appearance bore similarities to witness descriptions, and some researchers noted eerie parallels between his writings and the Zodiac style. Others pointed to his access to printing presses and his connections to the Bay Area counterculture. Still, despite speculation, no solid evidence ever placed him at the crime scenes. Then there was Lawrence Kane, a man with a history of stalking women and reported memory problems due to brain injuries. One of the survivors, Kathleen Johns, who had escaped an abduction attempt, often linked to the Zodiac, later identified Kane as her attacker. Additionally, a police sketch from the Paul Stein murder bore some resemblance to him. Yet again, the evidence was circumstantial at best, and no definitive link was established. Over the years, other suspects emerged, each with tantalizing hints, but no definitive proof. Some investigators looked into Ross Sullivan, a library worker whose odd behavior and physical appearance seemed suspicious. Others examined Ted Kaczynski, the infamous Unabomber, because of his known use of ciphers and anti-establishment ideology. Still others pointed to Earl Van Best Jr., named decades later in a book by his son, who argued that handwriting samples and circumstantial details fit the profile. Each time, investigators hoped for a breakthrough. Each time, the case fell apart under scrutiny. Part of the problem was the Zodiac himself. He was a master manipulator, feeding investigators false leads, writing letters filled with red herrings, and constantly changing his methods. Unlike many serial killers, who follow patterns that allow police to profile them, the Zodiac seemed to delight in breaking patterns. He used guns, knives, urban settings, rural areas. Nothing about him stayed consistent, except his desire to taunt. Law enforcement agencies were also fragmented. Multiple jurisdictions, Vallejo Police, San Francisco Police, the Napa County Sheriff's Office, and eventually the FBI were involved. But in the 1960s and 70s, communication between departments was far less coordinated than it is today. Evidence was scattered, leads went cold, and the killer slipped through the cracks. Even with modern technology, including DNA testing and handwriting analysis, no suspect has ever been definitively proven to be the Zodiac. In fact, some experts argue that the killer may have been someone who was never even on the suspect list. A man, hiding in plain sight, blending into the community, unremarkable except for the darkness within. The frustration of the investigation only added to the Zodiac's legend. Every time a suspect emerged, the public latched onto the possibility of unmasking the killer. Books, documentaries, and amateur sleuths fueled speculation. Some suspects were vilified unfairly, their names forever linked to crimes they may never have committed. Others faded into obscurity, leaving behind more questions than answers. And so, more than 50 years later, the investigation remains unsolved. The suspects are many, the evidence inconclusive, and the truth elusive. The Zodiac's ability to avoid capture is part of what makes him so infamous. He played with police, taunted the media, and created a story that remains unfinished. What is most haunting is this. Each time investigators thought they were close, the Zodiac slipped away. He was always one step ahead, like a ghost just beyond reach. And perhaps that is why the case still fascinates us today. It is not just the murders or the letters. It is the endless chase, the mystery of a man who could be anyone, anywhere, and no one all at once. More than half a century has passed since the Zodiac Killer first terrorized Northern California. Yet his name still echoes through the corridors of criminal history. Despite endless investigations, countless suspects, and even breakthroughs in modern forensic science, his true identity remains unknown. This enduring mystery is what transforms the Zodiac from a serial killer into something larger, a legend of unsolved evil. Why has the case remained unsolved for so long? Part of the answer lies in the time period. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, forensic science was far less advanced. DNA testing did not exist. Criminal profiling was in its infancy. Evidence like fingerprints, handwriting, and eyewitness accounts carried far more weight than they do today. Yet all were prone to error and manipulation. The Zodiac understood this. He left behind just enough evidence to prove his authenticity: letters, ciphers, and a piece of Paul Stein's shirt, but never enough to tie him definitively to a name or face. Another reason the mystery endures is the fragmented investigation. Multiple jurisdictions worked the case: San Francisco Police, Vallejo Police, Napa County, Solano County, and eventually the FBI. But in that era, communication between departments was limited. Files were not always shared, evidence was scattered, and each jurisdiction guarded its own leads. The Zodiac thrived in this chaos. By spreading his crimes across different counties, he ensured that no single agency had the full picture. Then there is the matter of the letters and ciphers. They were not just taunts, they were distractions. Each new puzzle sent police scrambling, consuming time and resources. Some ciphers were solved, revealing nothing but mockery. Others remain unsolved to this day. Whether they contained genuine clues, or were simply gibberish, they kept investigators chasing shadows. Zodiac was more than a murderer. He was a manipulator, turning law enforcement into unwilling players in his deadly game. Technology has given us hope, but even modern science has not cracked the case. In the 1990s and 2000s, investigators tried to extract DNA from stamps and envelopes used in Zodiac's letters. While partial profiles were obtained, they were often contaminated or inconclusive. Later, in the 2010s, genealogical DNA analysis, famous for identifying the Golden State Killer, offered new possibilities. Yet, even with this powerful tool, the Zodiac's identity has not been confirmed. Perhaps the samples are too degraded, or perhaps the killer never left enough behind. And so, the Zodiac lives on in speculation, Armchair detectives across the world pore over his ciphers, suspect lists and letters, hoping to uncover the missing piece. Entire books and documentaries have been devoted to new theories. Every few years, a new headline surfaces, Zodiac Killer finally identified. Yet each claim eventually unravels, leaving the mystery intact. The truth remains just out of reach. But why does the mystery endure, not just in the files of police, but in our collective imagination? Perhaps it is because the Zodiac represents something terrifyingly human, the fear of the unknown. We fear the idea that someone could kill, taunt and then vanish into society, never to be caught. We fear the possibility that he lived an ordinary life afterward, shopping at grocery stores, attending parties, working a 9-to-5 job while carrying the darkest of secrets. The Zodiac could have been anyone, and that uncertainty lingers. The enduring mystery also owes much to the cultural impact. The Zodiac's crimes coincided with a period of massive social change in America. The optimism of the 1960s was colliding with the harsh realities of war, protest, and political unrest. Against this backdrop, the Zodiac's ability to manipulate the media and evade justice made him more than a criminal. He became a symbol of chaos in an already turbulent time. Films, books, and TV shows cemented his place in popular culture, ensuring his story would never fade. Some believe the Zodiac may have died years ago, his secret buried with him. Others suggest he is still alive, perhaps even watching the documentaries and reading the articles about himself. The chilling possibility that he could have lived a quiet, unnoticed life after committing such horrors only deepens the mystery. In the end, the Zodiac's greatest victory may not have been the crimes he committed, but the legend he created. By leaving just enough evidence to prove he existed, but never enough to prove who he was, he secured a kind of immortality. He remains a shadow that law enforcement could never fully catch, a riddle that continues to defy solution. This enduring mystery forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How could someone kill and vanish without consequence? How many answers were lost due to poor communication, lack of technology, or sheer chance? And perhaps most chillingly, will we ever know the truth? Or will the Zodiac remain forever unidentified, his name etched in history as the ultimate unsolved case? The Zodiac Killer was more than just a criminal case. He was more than letters, ciphers, and unsolved murders. Over time, he became a cultural figure, a dark symbol of fear, mystery, and the limits of justice. The cultural impact of the Zodiac Killer is immense, shaping not only true crime history, but also art, literature, and film. In many ways, the story of the Zodiac lives on, because culture itself refuses to let him fade. From the moment the Zodiac sent his first letters, his crimes dominated the headlines. But unlike other killers of his era, his name and symbol transcended the immediate horror of his acts. He became a myth, a story retold again and again. Newspapers sensationalized his threats. Radio shows debated his motives. Families whispered his name at dinner tables. Children were warned to stay inside after dark. The Zodiac was not just a man anymore. He was a shadow that lived in the collective imagination of California. As decades passed, his legend grew. Hollywood seized upon the story, finding in it a mix of horror, mystery, and psychological intrigue. Films like Dirty Harry 1971 drew inspiration directly from the Zodiac, creating a fictionalized killer named Scorpio, who terrorized San Francisco with taunting messages. Years later, David Fincher's Zodiac 2007 brought the case to the big screen with painstaking detail, reigniting public fascination and introducing a new generation to the mystery. The film's success proved what investigators already knew. The Zodiac case was not just about crime, it was about obsession. Books, too, have kept the story alive. From Robert Graysmith's Zodiac to countless true crime studies, the killer has inspired volumes of research and speculation. Each book promises new clues, new suspects, new theories, but always returns to the same haunting truth. No one knows for sure who the Zodiac was. This endless cycle of speculation fuels the legend, making him an eternal puzzle for readers and researchers. The Zodiac also influenced the way we view criminal psychology. Before him, few killers actively manipulated the media or built a personal brand around their crimes. Today, when we talk about killers who seek fame or recognition, we can trace that playbook back to the Zodiac. His use of symbols, ciphers and threats turned him into a pioneer of fear as performance. Law enforcement and journalists learned hard lessons about the dangers of giving killers a platform, lessons still debated in media ethics today. Beyond crime and media, the Zodiac became a symbol in popular culture. His crosshair emblem, chilling in its simplicity, appears in documentaries, artworks, and even music. It has become shorthand for mystery and menace, instantly recognizable, even to those who know little about the actual case. The idea of a faceless killer who taunts authorities has inspired not just films but entire genres of storytelling, from crime dramas to psychological thrillers. The cultural impact is also global. Though the Zodiac's crimes occurred in Northern California, his legend spread worldwide. True crime enthusiasts from every corner of the globe study his ciphers. Online forums buzz with theories and debates, with amateur detectives dedicating years of their lives to cracking codes or re-examining suspects. In this way, the Zodiac is no longer just a local killer. He is an international mystery. But perhaps the most haunting cultural impact is the way the Zodiac continues to symbolize the fear of the unknown. Other killers have been caught, tried and punished. Their names fade with time, filed away as grim history. But the Zodiac endures precisely because he was never unmasked. He represents the idea that evil can exist in plain sight, that justice is not always served, and that some questions may never be answered. That uncertainty fuels not only fear, but fascination. The victims and their families, of course, are the ones who paid the greatest price. For them, the Zodiac is not a cultural figure or a mystery. It is a wound that never fully healed. Yet even their stories have become part of the broader narrative, ensuring that the victims are not forgotten amid the myth. In every documentary, every book, every film, their names are repeated. A reminder that the Zodiac story is not only about puzzles and letters, but about lives stolen. In the end, the Zodiac's cultural impact lies in his transformation from man to myth. He was a real person, flesh and blood. But he built himself into a legend that has outlived him. His ciphers remain unsolved, his identity unconfirmed, his crimes etched into history. He is studied, feared, and remembered not only for what he did, but for what he represents, the eternal mystery of evil that hides in the shadows. And that may be the Zodiac's final victory. While he may never have been caught, he ensured that his name, his chosen identity, his symbol, would live on. 50 years later, we are still talking about him, still analyzing his codes, still wondering who he was. The Zodiac Killer may be gone, but his story is immortal. This concludes our series on the Zodiac Killer. From his emergence in the late 1960s, through his self-proclaimed identity, infamous letters, chilling attacks, survivor testimonies, and endless investigations, we have explored the depth of one of history's most disturbing mysteries. Yet, despite all we know, the ultimate question remains unanswered. Who was the Zodiac Killer? If you have followed us through this journey, thank you. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell to support our work in bringing you more mysteries from history and beyond. And in the comments tell us, what do you think? Will the Zodiac ever be unmasked? Or will he forever remain the faceless shadow of America's most infamous unsolved crime?